Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about a bed. Not just any bed, but one so small, so cramped, so questionably designed, that you'd wonder how anyone in history ever managed to sleep at all. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where beds weren't built for stretching out, and comfort was mostly a suggestion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your city and the time you're watching this I love, knowing where in the world we're all dreaming together now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You enter a dim, smoky room made of uneven stone. The hearth is still warm from the evening fire, and a wooden bed sits tucked against the far wall. But something feels off. You walk closer, expecting a cozy place to lie down, and that's when you realize this bed is barely the length of your legs. It's high off the ground, wide enough for only one person, maybe two if they were very friendly. And it has a wooden canopy overhead, like it's trying to look important. But it's short, comically short. You kneel down, squinting. In the low firelight, the blanket is rough wool, the mattress is uneven, and the pillow is basically a sack of straw. This was no mistake in medieval IKEA measurements. This bed is small on purpose. You try to imagine curling up in it. Your knees would definitely be bent, your back a little hunched. Not ideal, but you're in 14th century rural England, nor maybe northern France. And here, this is how it's done. Beds back then weren't built for full-body relaxation. They weren't meant for Sunday morning lounging or scrolling through your magical glass rectangle, which here would have gotten you burned for sorcery. No, these beds were functional, economical, and by modern standards, kind of terrible. But small beds weren't just about saving wood or space. In fact, they tell a much bigger story about how people viewed sleep, safety, and even their place in the universe. See? You weren't expected to lie down flat. That was uncomfortable for more than physical reasons. The dead lie flat. The sick lie flat. Upright or semi-upright sleeping was much more normal, even respectable. And so, this strange little bed isn't a sign of poor craftsmanship. It's a cultural artifact, a signal that you're about to fall asleep in a world where sleep looked nothing like it does today. You lie down carefully, awkwardly curling your legs. The room is cold. There's no pillow-top mattress, no memory foam, just a lumpy sack and maybe a sheepskin. Your breath curls in the air. Someone has drawn the bed curtains to trap the warmth inside. You're not alone. This tiny bed is just big enough for you and perhaps a child, a spouse, or a cousin. Privacy is not a luxury in this world. As the wind whistles outside and the fire dims to embers, you pull the coarse blanket up to your chin. The bed creaks, like it's thinking about collapsing. You're not sure if you're comfortable, but strangely, you're not uncomfortable either. This is where people dreamed for centuries on small beds, in cold rooms, with half-shut eyes and half-upright backs. The strange thing is, they got used to it, and now, so will you. You shift in your tiny bed, still trying to convince your limbs to settle in ways they weren't designed to. And that's when the question hits you. Why? Why would anyone choose to sleep like this? The answer, oddly enough, is not because they were short. Let's get that out of the way. Yes, medieval people were generally shorter than modern humans. Poor nutrition, frequent illness, and less access to diverse food all played a role, but they weren't that short. Average height for men was around 5 feet 7 inches, 170 centimeters, and many were taller, which means they could have used bigger beds if they wanted to. But here's the twist. They didn't. Not because they couldn't, but because lying completely flat was seen as unnatural, even ominous. Sleeping flat on your back, that's what corpses do. People in their final hours are laid out that way. Sickbeds, deathbeds, plague victims, they all shared that posture, to mimic it willingly. That was unsettling at best, and inviting death at worst. So, you adjust. You propped yourself up with a lumpy bolster under your back. Your knees bend slightly, and your head tilts forward, as if you've fallen asleep reading a particularly dull sermon. It's not so much restful as it is acceptably alive. It's also about circulation. Believe it or not, some medieval medical theories promoted semi-upright sleeping for better flow of the humors. You know, the four magical body fluids that governed everything from mood swings to foot fungus. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Lovely, right? Doctors of the day, quoting Galen and other classical authorities, believed that lying too flat could encourage those pesky humors to pool in dangerous places. So staying slightly elevated, very health conscious, very responsible. There's also a practical side. Many people slept in shared rooms, or even shared beds, with family members, servants, or travelers. Sitting up made it easier to talk quietly, tend to children, or hear someone trying to steal your shoes, and, if we're honest, a lot of people didn't sleep through the night anyway. Medieval sleep was often segmented more on that soon, and sitting upright helped you stay ready between rest periods. You yawn. You think about how modern sleep experts now recommend elevating your head for better breathing. Maybe the medieval folks were onto something, or maybe they were just coping. Either way, you now understand. The bed wasn't small because the people were. It was small because their relationship with sleep was shaped by fear, faith, medicine, and just enough superstition to keep things interesting. And as the candle flickers next to you, you begin to appreciate the strange logic of this little wooden box. It's not a coffin, it's a compromise. Asterisk, you shift again, this time trying to straighten your back without hitting your head on the wooden canopy overhead. The pillow, or what passes for one, is so firm it feels like it's judging you. Eventually, you give up trying to lie down completely, and instead settle into a sort of slouching squat. Congratulations, you're now officially sleeping like a medieval peasant, or noble, or monk. Everyone did it, really. See, the semi-seated position wasn't a fluke, it was practically a tradition. There's a woodcut from the 15th century that shows a man dozing off in bed with his hat still on and his knees up, like he's riding a ghost horse. And that image, it's surprisingly accurate. In many households, sitting up to sleep was common, not just because of beliefs about health or death, but because the beds were designed to encourage it. They weren't exactly recliners, but the shape of the frame, the height off the ground, and the angled headrest all pushed you to stay upright. The kind of posture you'd take during a very slow, never-ending sermon. And speaking of sermons, religion played a role too. If you were pious, and most people at least pretended to be, sleeping upright made it easier to transition into prayer during the night. You didn't even have to get out of bed to start atoning for your sins. Handy. Now imagine the physical toll. No memory foam, no orthopedic support, no melatonin gummies. You might have stuffed your mattress with straw or feathers if you were lucky, or with heather and old wool if you weren't. Over time, it would compress unevenly, leading to delightful lumps in just the wrong places. But hey, if you're uncomfortable enough, you probably won't oversleep. There's a term in some medieval texts, dormitio composita. It means a composed sleep, often used to describe saints or monks who slept upright out of discipline and spiritual strength, or, perhaps more realistically, because their stone cell floors didn't offer much choice. And yet, sleeping this way had its logic. Upright sleep kept you alert, ready to rise for prayers, tend to a crying child, or chase out a rat. And if you lived in a drafty stone house, sitting up kept your head above the coldest air near the floor. Medieval heating, basically non-existent. Historians still argue whether upright sleeping was everyday normal or more of a class-based or religious behavior. Some suggest it was reserved for the sick, the rich, or the excessively devout. Others believe it was simply the most comfortable option when your bed doubled as your dining chair, writing desk, and baby crib. But whether it was for health, safety, status, or theology, one thing's certain: nobody cared about spinal alignment. As you lean back, halfway between sitting and flopping, the bed creaks once more. Not in protest, more like resignation. And you, dear traveler in time, are slowly learning that medieval sleep was not about luxury, it was about survival, ritual, and trying not to roll off the edge. Sleep tight. Just, maybe not too flat. The fire in the hearth has dwindled to a faint orange glow, casting soft shadows that ripple across the rough stone walls. You're sitting up in your tiny bed, trying not to think about how long the night still is. Midnight in the Middle Ages is not just a time, it's a concept, and not a comforting one. See, in medieval times, the darkest hours of night were considered the most dangerous, not because of thieves or wolves though, those were real enough, but because of everything else that might be out there. Things you couldn't name, things that creaked, moaned, whispered. If something bad was going to happen, this was the hour it would choose. You glance at the window, if you're lucky enough to have one, and find it shuttered tightly. Even the moonlight seems hesitant to enter. Medieval people didn't romanticize the night. They endured it, especially this middle stretch when the temperature dropped. The candles burned out, and the human mind started inventing problems it couldn't solve. People often referred to this as the waking hour, not because they were especially alert, but because they tended to wake up either out of habit, fear, or the cold. It's that uncanny 1-2-3 a.m. window when your body goes, nope, we're not doing this, and your soul agrees. This is when you'd sit upright in bed, heart beating just a little too fast, wondering if the sound you heard was a rat, the wind, or something else. A neighbor coughing next door, someone walking outside, a spirit. Let's not forget, this was a deeply religious age. Heaven and hell weren't metaphors, they were destinations. The devil didn't just tempt you in daylight, he was said to lurk especially hard in the late night. Sleep left you vulnerable. Dreams weren't always friendly, and protection came not from locks, but from crossing yourself 3 times and whispering a prayer. That's if you could even get warm enough to sleep again. Houses weren't insulated. Blankets were wool at best, damp at worst. You'd huddle, under thick cloth, next to family, hoping no fire sparked and no mouse crawled into your boot. Some noble households employed night guards, not to protect from robbers, but from fire, intruders, and the supernatural. Meanwhile, regular folks did their best to survive the stillness, clinging to rituals and rhythms passed down for generations. Modern science calls this nighttime wake-up segmented sleep. In the Middle Ages, they didn't need a label. They just knew this was the hour of shadows. Some got up to stoke the fire. Some prayed. Some snuck in a quiet snack, or even some nighttime mischief. And some just stared at the rafters and waited. Historians still debate how universal these habits were. Was everyone waking up in terror, or just the folks with too much imagination and not enough blankets? Hard to say. But nearly every record we have, diaries, sermons, folk songs mentions this eerie, universal pause in the human night. You sit there now, goosebumps rising as the wind rattles the wooden shutters, your breath clouds in the cold, and suddenly, the dark doesn't feel quite so empty. It feels crowded by now. You're realizing that sleeping in the Middle Ages was less about comfort and more about navigating a delicate balance of survival, superstition, and sore hips. But not everyone just needed a place to curl up. Some people, especially the wealthy, needed to make a statement with their beds. You walk into a noble's chamber, and the first thing that catches your eye isn't the fireplace or the chest full of linens, it's the bed, massive, elevated, draped in deep-colored fabrics and standing high above the floor, like a throne laid sideways. This, my friend, is not just a place to sleep. This is a flex. In medieval Europe, especially by the 14th and 15th centuries, Beds had become serious status symbols. A four-poster bed, carved from oak or walnut, adorned with brightly dyed curtains and embroidered canopies, told visitors one thing: you had money, and you were probably not shy about it. The height of the bed was practical in some ways. Cold air settled low, so sleeping up high meant staying warmer. But let's be real, a ladder to get into bed, that's less about insulation and more about invitation to be admired. We have records of royal beds that were so large and so extravagantly decorated, they were practically public stages. In fact, in France and England, it wasn't uncommon for aristocrats to receive guests while sitting in bed. Imagine conducting a business meeting from beneath your duvet. That's medieval energy, and if you were really fancy, your bed could be part of your wedding dowry, a family heirloom, or even included in your will. To my eldest son, I leave the wool trade. To my youngest, the bed with the crimson canopy and gold tassels. Priorities. These beds were mobile too, not in the roll it around sense, but in the let's pack it and move it to the summer manor way. The frame came apart in pieces, and yes, wealthy people had servants just for furniture, transportation. But here's the kicker: despite the size and flourish, the beds weren't necessarily more comfortable. You still had lumpy stuffing, itchy wool, and questionable pillow design. So why bother? Because medieval nobility loved their symbolic furniture. The bed wasn't just for rest, it was a stage for life's major events: birth, marriage, illness, and eventually death. Some even had a separate deathbed for the occasion. Thoughtful, and yet, with all this drama, the essential features remained: curtains to trap heat, elevation to escape floor drafts, and a tendency to sleep sitting up because even kings didn't want to tempt fate by lying too flat. So, as you stare at this regal contraption, half furniture, half temple, you realize something. Comfort was optional. Image was everything, and if someone happened to peek into your chamber, well, they wouldn't just see a bed, they'd see your entire social rank, draped in velvet and slightly too short. Asterisk, you shuffle under your scratchy blanket, tugging it over your shoulders as another draft snakes across the stone floor. It's cold again, predictably so. But tonight, you're prepared. You pull the heavy curtains shut around your bed frame. And for the first time, you understand why medieval people took bed accessories very seriously. Because let's be honest, medieval homes were not built for comfort. There's no central heating, no insulation, no soft rugs underfoot. Your window is a hole in the wall, covered with oiled linen, or maybe a shutter that doesn't quite close. The wind howls like it just got dumped by a Viking bard, so you adapt. You reach for the bed curtains. Thick woolen, often lined with linen or silk, if you're well off. These curtains aren't just for drama, they're for warmth and privacy. In a shared house, you might be sleeping next to your siblings, servants, or goats. Yes, goats. Pulling those curtains closed turns your tiny sleeping space into a microclimate. The flickering candle outside the curtain becomes a memory. The smell of the chamber pot at the foot of the bed, well, that stays, unfortunately, but it's warmer in here, and slightly more peaceful. Curtains weren't just for warmth, they were also static. The more fabric you had, the wealthier you appeared. Want to feel fancy in 1420? Hang a few tapestries, and sleep behind velvet. But you need more than curtains in a house where your breath fogs. The air. Enter the warming panna, shallow metal tray with a long wooden handle, filled with hot coals from the hearth. A servant or you, if you were both poor and brave, would run this pan between the sheets before bedtime. Just try not to set the mattress on fire. That happened quite a bit. Then there were bed socks, nightcaps, and even headcloths wrapped like a stylish burrito around your ears. Some people wore full clothing to bed, layers upon layers, because the idea of pajamas as we know them didn't exist. Sleeping naked, that was a sin, or at least suspicious. And what about bugs? You might hang netting, not for mosquitoes, but to discourage the more fashionable medieval vermin, fleas, lice, and the occasional bat. Not to mention you'd sprinkle your sheets with herbs like lavender or wormwood, partly to smell nice, partly to drive away pests, and perhaps spirits. Medieval multitasking. You shift again, appreciating how your curtain traps just enough warmth to stop your teeth from chattering. Outside the bed, you hear a soft snore. Maybe it's your cousin. Maybe it's the dog. Historians still debate how widespread these cozy bed tricks were. Some argue only the rich could afford warming pans and curtains. Others point out that even peasants used thick sheepskins and layered straw with care. Human beings are creative, especially when cold. So now, surrounded by cloth, warmed by embers, tucked into your slightly too short cocoon, you begin to understand. Sleep in the Middle Ages wasn't just something you did, it was something you prepared for, like a ritual, a battle, or a bad winter. You jolt awake, not because of a nightmare, not because someone yelled, you just, wake up, and you're not alone. Around you, other rustles echo faintly. Your sister stirs, the baby whimpers, a rooster crows way too early. It's still deep night, and yet here you are, fully, naturally, awake. Welcome to the Middle Ages' favorite sleep pattern, first sleep and second sleep. See, the modern idea of getting a solid, uninterrupted 7 to 8 hours of shut-eye. That's actually a pretty recent invention. Before artificial lighting rearranged human schedules, people often slept in 2 distinct chunks. First sleep primo somna, then a waking period, then second sleep secunda somna. First sleep starts soon after sunset. It's the heavy, dream-rich part of the night, when your body fully unwinds, and then 2 or 3 hours, and you stir, and stay awake. On purpose, this midnight interlude wasn't seen as a problem. It was seen as an opportunity. You might tend the fire, say a few prayers, or if you're like most medieval folks, get up and do things, quiet things, productive things, like mending clothes, grinding grain, or even visiting neighbors. Yes, social calls. In the middle of the night, medieval sources mention people walking to town, meeting in taverns, or, let's say, sneaking into someone else's bed during this window. Historians have even found court records of unsanctioned night visits that occurred between the first and second sleep. Other people used this time for reflection. In some monastic orders, this was the designated prayer time. Vigils. You'd wake, chant, read scripture by candlelight, and maybe write something in a manuscript. Quiet, spiritual labor. And then, perhaps an hour or 2 later, you'd go back to sleep. No guilt, no insomnia worries. You'd slip into second sleep, which tended to be lighter and dreamier, carrying you through to sunrise. Some modern sleep. Scientists believe this natural biphasic sleep pattern might actually be healthier for us than our current pressure to sleep all at once. It allowed time for memory consolidation, digestion, and even a mental reset. But how common was this pattern? Historical references show up across Europe in sermons, medical texts, diaries, and even farming manuals. So while it's debated whether every household followed it, the idea of waking midnight wasn't strange. It was routine. You lie back, now awake but unbothered. The silence hums like a lullaby. The candle on your bedside table glows dimly. Your limbs are warm. Your thoughts drift. This is the most honest part of night, a quiet between 2 dreams. A space for stillness in a world that never stops needing you. And soon, when your eyes begin to blur and your breath slows, you'll slide gently into second sleep. As naturally as the tide. You're half asleep, drifting comfortably in your medieval cocoon of wool and stale herbs. When suddenly someone else climbs into your bed. Not your spouse, not a family member, just someone. Don't panic. You're experiencing the wildly normal, slightly awkward tradition of bed-sharing in medieval times. Especially for common folk, sharing beds wasn't just expected, it was practical. Homes were small, heating was minimal, and beds when available were precious real estate. So the idea of one bed per person, completely absurd, wasteful even. You might share a bed with siblings, servants, guests, or total strangers who were just passing through town and needed a place to rest. Inns, for instance, rarely offered private rooms. More often, you rented a space in a bed, not the bed itself. It was called hot bedding, and no, it's not what you think. It simply meant the mattress had been warmed by a previous body. Lovely? Even upper-class households followed this logic. A nobleman might sleep beside his valet. A lady-in-waiting might share with a noblewoman. It was part safety, part companionship, and let's be real, part body heat. Of course, this led to some incredible stories. Travelers complained about bedmates with fleas. Monks recorded snoring contests. There's even a 13th century French, Faubleau kind of body poem, about a man who accidentally spooned a priest all night, thinking it was his wife. Oops. But it wasn't all awkwardness. There was a kind of communal intimacy to bed sharing that modern minds struggled to grasp. Beds were safe zones, places for gossip, storytelling, or exchanging family news before drifting off. In some cultures, it was expected that younger people would learn adult wisdom, not that kind from their older bedmate. You might be lectured, comforted, or gently scolded, all from beneath a shared quilt. Of course, not everyone enjoyed this closeness. Records from medieval court cases mention disputes over bed space, stolen blankets, or unwanted advances, and sometimes people paid extra for a clean bed, code for no one else already drooling on the pillow. Historians still debate how common this truly was across social classes and regions. Some say rural peasants practiced more solitary sleep. Others insist shared sleeping was the norm nearly everywhere, regardless of gender, age, or background. You turn now, careful not to elbow the person next to you. You don't know their name. You probably never will. But for tonight, in this cramped, wooden room with frost on the inside of the shutters, you are bedfellows united by necessity, custom, and the hope for at least 6 inches of blanket apiece. Sleep tight. Asterisk. You're lying still now, wrapped in rough wool, and surrounded by the faint warmth of nearby bodies. When you realize sleeping in the Middle Ages was never truly silent. In fact, the night had a soundscape all its own, and it wasn't exactly soothing. First, there's the crackle of the dying hearth, spitting faint embers into the room's shadows. It's comforting in theory, until it fades, leaving behind a hush that makes every other noise sharper. Next comes the symphony of snoring, a chorus of wheezing, gargling, occasionally whistling breath from your fellow bedmates. You try not to judge, but seriously, how does someone sound like a blacksmith hammering through their nose? From the corner, you hear a baby stirring, followed by a low murmur from its mother. Not angry, just tired. Maybe she's humming a lullaby, passed down since Charlemagne. Or maybe she's just telling the baby, no, not again. Then there's the animal noises. Because yes, livestock often shared space with humans. If you're sleeping in a cottage, odds are good there's a goat snuffling nearby, or a chicken settling in its basket. Sometimes you hear the unmistakable pitter-patter of a rat across the rafters. Medieval lullabies, folks. And just as you think things are calming down, someone coughs. A long, rattly, chest-deep cough that echoes into the rafters. Maybe it's just winter. Maybe it's plague. You don't ask. Outside, the wind whistles through the cracks. Occasionally, a town bell tolls, marking midnight prayers, or signaling a watch change. If you're in a city, you might hear the clomp of patrol boots, or the distant cry of a night watchman yelling the hour in a way that somehow feels both heroic and profoundly annoying. But here's the twist. These sounds weren't necessarily bothersome to medieval sleepers. They were normal, even comforting. In a world without white noise machines or playlists of ambient rain, These real-life sounds marked the passing of time, reminded you that you weren't alone, and grounded you in the rhythms of the night. People back then weren't expecting silence. In fact, total silence might have made them anxious. Something must be wrong if you can't hear the donkey 3 houses over, right? Even within monasteries, where quiet was a spiritual goal, monks often reported hearing each other shuffle, breathe, or shift in their cots, and they found ways to make peace with it. Some claimed the hum of life was a kind of divine background music. Today, we pump artificial noise into our rooms to fall asleep, fans, apps, YouTube channels like this one. Back then, people had each other, and the creaking, coughing, snoring, medieval night was just the price of being human in a world where the dark was never truly empty. You close your eyes now, not to block the sounds out, but to let them carry you. Because maybe, just maybe, this messy, noisy lullaby is exactly what people have always needed. The sky hasn't turned blue yet, but the faintest gray is leaking in through the shutters. A rooster somewhere very close lets out a proud, stuttering crow. You groan softly, not because of the noise, but because it means the medieval night is over, and morning is now someone else's business. You stretch, careful not to kick your bedmate, whose elbow is still suspiciously lodged near your ribs. The straw mattress crackles beneath you. It doesn't spring back, just sort of sighs. In the Middle Ages, waking up wasn't an event, it was a sequence. No alarms, no snooze button. Just the natural pressure of light, noise, and bodily discomfort. That stiff neck isn't going to loosen itself. For peasants, the day starts as soon as there's enough light to see your hands. You might rise before sunrise if there's livestock to feed, fires to light, or bread to bake. Your body learns to obey the sun, whether it wants to or not. If you're in a monastery, the bells do the waking. And they ring early, like you don't single quotes T-want-2-no-how-early. Monks were expected to be alert from morning prayers, Montans lauds and beyond. No sleeping in when your boss is, technically, God, and for the nobility. Waking was slower, more luxurious. You might lie in bed longer, surrounded by curtains and pillows, stuffed with feathers, or the feathers of birds that very much resented the arrangement. A servant might enter to check the fire, fetch water, or gently tug the drapes to let in sunlight. Breakfast. That depended. Many people didn't eat first thing. Some just drank a cup of warm ale, or pasita milky, spiced drink that sounds cozy until you realize it probably came from a pot that hadn't been washed in 3 days. You might chew on a crust of bread, left over from yesterday's supper. Or if you're lucky, fresh porridge simmered slowly overnight by the embers. It's thick, bland, and somehow comforting. Like your dreams, if they were food. But mornings weren't always so calm. In a bustling town, you'd wake 2 vendors shouting, horses clattering on cobblestone, children arguing, and the relentless sound of life restarting, noisy, fragrant, utterly alive. Historians still debate how rested people truly were in the Middle Ages. Some suggest that Bafasic sleep gave them deeper rest overall. Others point out that constant noise, cold, and sharing made truly restful sleep a rare luxury, especially during winter, when getting out of bed could feel like a personal betrayal by your own limbs. But regardless, people got up, because they had to. Life was waiting. You sit now, rubbing your eyes, the smell of wood smoke and damp linen all around you. Someone is already poking the fire. Someone else is yawning, loudly, and even though your back aches and your feet are cold, there's something steady about this routine, a rhythm, a simplicity. The medieval morning doesn't ask how you feel. It just begins softly, steadily like light slipping between cracks in the shutters. Asterisk, you sit on the edge of your bed, still half wrapped in the warmth of sleep, when you remember that strange dream. A horse with a human face, a ladder made of bones, your grandmother handing you a fish. You blink, unsure if you're more disturbed or just hungry, In the Middle Ages, you wouldn't shrug this off, because back then, dreams were messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from the devil, often from your own muddled stomach, but always worth paying attention to. The medieval mind didn't separate sleep from meaning. Night was a veil one you could peek behind, if you were paying attention, and dreams. They were the whispers that passed through. If you lived near a monastery, you might speak with a monk who had read from Macrobius or Boethius, thinkers who categorized dreams like wine, by quality, origin, and effect. A dream that came during your first sleep might be prophetic. One after eating too much cheese. Probably just indigestion. Yes, cheese dreams were a documented thing. There were dream manuals, handwritten and passed down, that told you what it meant if you dreamed of snake's bait. Water depends on clarity. Or teeth falling out. Someone in your family might die or get married. It's not super consistent. Some nobles even hired dream interpreters, like medieval therapists in robes, to help decode their visions. And in religious circles, dreams were sometimes treated as visions, especially if they involved angels, saints, or flaming wheels. But not all dreams were welcome. You might fear incubi and succubi, demons said to visit during sleep. Parents told stories of shadowy figures sitting on your chest, stealing breath, or planting wicked thoughts. Nightmares weren't just bad dreams, they were spiritual skirmishes. And then, of course, there were the dead. It was common belief that the recently departed could appear in your dreams, either to deliver warnings, or to ask for prayers. If you dreamed of someone who had died without last rites, it was your duty to light a candle, say a prayer, or drop a coin in the poor box for their soul. Even animals got dream symbolism. Dreaming of a white dog might mean loyalty, a black cat. Well, you know how that one goes. Historians still debate how widespread and deeply personal dream interpretation was. Some believe it was mostly elite monks and scholars who recorded such ideas. Others argue that commoners had rich, local traditions, often rooted in folk belief and practical wisdom. You rub your face now, trying to hold on to the fragments of your own dream before it fades. Was that a forest? Was someone singing? Did your socks grow wings? You'll never know for sure, but for someone like you, in a world lit by fire and ruled by stars, that dream might still matter. Maybe it was nonsense, or maybe just maybe it was a message from the night itself, quietly reminding you that even in the cold, crowded, noisy dark, there's still room for a little mystery. Asterisk, you look down at the bed you've just climbed out of, rough, uneven, creaking under its own memory, and realize this isn't just a place to sleep, it's a living artifact, one that has quietly recorded your family's history in wool and wood and straw. In the Middle Ages, the bed wasn't just furniture, it was legacy. Beds were expensive, handmade, handed down, a sign of wealth, if you were lucky, and a precious commodity, even if you weren't. For many households, it was the most valuable object in the entire home, more prized than livestock, tools, or clothing. And so it became more than a place to lie down. It became the center of life. You were probably born in a bed like this, surrounded by the whispered encouragement of midwives and the firm grip of your mother's hands on a scratchy blanket. If you had siblings, they were born here too, one by one, like verses in a song sung into straw. You were bathed here, when the hearth fire was warm enough. You were scolded here, pulled by the ear after some small disaster involving geese or spilled grain. You might have learned to sew here, using the wrinkled linen coverlet as your first canvas, and when your grandparents reached the ends of their stories, this was likely where they died, not alone, not in a hospital, but surrounded by family, the scent of candles, and prayers you could almost hum by heart. This bed knew joy, the giggles of children, stolen kisses, whispered secrets under covers. It also knew grief, tears soaked into pillows, long nights spent staring at wooden beams waiting for an answer from the dark. Even in wealthier households, beds weren't always private. You might share it with siblings, cousins, wet nurses, or even guests. It was a space that adjusted to circumstance. Beds were built to hold more than just people. They held moments. That's why wills from the time often mention beds specifically. To my daughter, I leave the feather bed with red embroidery. To my son, the oak frame bed in the corner room. Beds weren't casually replaced. They were inherited, like names. And if the mattress was too worn, you didn't throw it away. You restuffed it with straw, feathers, rags, a sort of medieval recycling that meant the bed you slept on contained physical scraps of your family's past. Historians love these little clues. A record here, a patch there, a lingering odor of herbs tucked under the sheet. Beds weren't silent. They told stories if you knew how to listen. You sit on the edge now, running your fingers along a carved pattern. Maybe it's ivy. Maybe it's a stylized fish. Either way, someone spent time on this detail, long before your fingers traced it. And you wonder, when you're gone, and someone else lies here, will they sense your dreams, your laughter, the warmth you left behind? Because in the Middle Ages, a bed wasn't just where the day ended, it was where the story stayed. You lie back on the bed again, but this time your feet hang off the edge. You scoot up. Now your head bumps the headboard. You shift again, still awkward. It's not you, it's the bed. Because yes, medieval beds really were shorter, not kids. Exactly, but definitely too short for the average modern adult to fully stretch out. And no, medieval people weren't dramatically tinier than us. That's a myth. So, why the tiny beds? Well, one popular theory is they didn't sleep lying flat. You'd rest at an angle, propped up slightly, like you're reading in bed with a few firm pillows and some lumbar ambition. This was partly because of respiratory issues. Lying flat was thought to be bad for the lungs, especially in cold, damp air. Sleeping upright, much healthier. Allegedly. Also, if you had heartburn, which, let's face it, after a medieval feast of greasy stews and slightly off meat, you probably did, reclining at an angle helped. Another reason, status. In some households, especially wealthier ones, elevated and curtained beds were meant to resemble thrones. Sitting up in bed was like being semi-royal while wearing your nightcap. There are even woodcuts showing lords receiving visitors, while still in bed, upright like sleepy monarchs of linen. And don't forget the layers. Between the thick straw mattress, feather-stuffed ticking, multiple quilts, furs, and woolen sheets, a bed became a mountain of warmth. You didn't need to sprawl out too, needed to tunnel in, like a hedgehog wrapped in pride and sheep. Some historians suggest that sleeping curled up might have just been more efficient in a world where beds were shared and space was tight. The smaller the bed, the easier to build, move, and warm with a hot stone or another person. Plus, the shape of the bed wasn't always meant for sleeping alone. Sometimes it had to accommodate two adults, a child or two, and maybe a dog. In that case, curling up was survival. Did some people sleep fully stretched out? Sure, but the short bed thing was real enough that we've found preserved bed frames from castles to cottages that make modern folks double take. There's even an amusing detail from early travel journals where visitors from other regions comment on the tiny beds of the locals like they were exotic artifacts. Charming, but alas, one cannot recline with dignity. The truth is, medieval sleep posture was flexible. People dozed, sitting up, napped hunched over work tables, snoozed on benches, or curled up beside the hearth, like particularly hopeful cats. You shift again, finally finding the spot. One knee bent, one arm tucked, blanket clutched like a treaty, and you think, maybe we've gotten too picky about sleep. Maybe a smaller bed isn't less comfortable. It's just asking you to meet it halfway. Asterisk, you're finally drifting off cozy, warm content when you hear it. A soft shuffle across the floor. Not rats this time. Not snoring. Footsteps. Human ones. You hold your breath. And then you hear someone mumble, thud gently into a bench, and keep going. Eyes half open, expression blank. You know what this is. They're sleepwalking again. In the Middle Ages, sleepwalking wasn't just odd behavior. It was borderline supernatural. People didn't call it sleepwalking as we do now. Instead, they used terms like noctambulism, or more commonly, moon wandering. And here's the twist. It wasn't always seen as dangerous. Sometimes, it was considered a sign of divine inspiration, or at least, a soul caught halfway between the earthly and the ethereal. That person staggering through the kitchen might be communing with angels, not just looking for yesterday's stew. But not always. Sometimes sleepwalking was feared, especially in cases where it led to property damage, self-harm, or heaven forbid a fall into the well. People whispered about spirits leading sleepers astray, or even possession. If someone did something truly strange, like walk out naked into the frost, or recite prayers backward, became everyone's business. In some towns, families tied a thread from a child's toe to the bedpost, hoping to keep them anchored. Others placed iron nails under pillows, garlic at the windowsill, or blessed water in a basin, all to ward off whatever they believed might be pulling the soul from the body at night, of course. Science has stepped in since then to say, relax. It's just your brain in low-power mode. But your body didn't get the memo. But in a world lit only by fire, when someone starts moving without waking, it's eerie. And sleepwalking wasn't the only strange nighttime behavior. There were also stories of sleep-talking, often revealing secrets or muttering prophecies. One noblewoman in Burgundy supposedly gave away an entire family scandal in her sleep only to wake and deny it completely. Her chambermaid wisely told no one until the day she really had to. Then there were night terrors, where children would scream without waking. Parents sometimes believed these were caused by night hags, invisible spirits who sat on your chest and stole your breath. The cure: say a protective charm, or turn the child's pillow upside down, or rub the soles of their feet with goose fat. Yes, goose fat. Welcome to history. Even crimes committed at night, theft, sneaking out, or brawling under moonlight, were sometimes excused by claiming I was asleep. I remember nothing. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it got you flogged. Historians debate how common sleepwalking was, or how seriously people took it. But court records and monastic journals show that the medieval world noticed what happened after dark, and didn't always assume it was harmless. Back in bed now, the sleepwalker has returned. They crawl in beside you like nothing happened. Their eyes flutter, their breathing deepens, and you lie there, wondering what part of the mind stirs when the world goes still. What else moves in the quiet while we dream? The sun has crept fully into the room now, kissing the floorboards and nudging the corners of the bed like a very polite intruder. The rooster has given up on you. A dog barks somewhere outside. Morning is no longer optional. It's time to fold the night away, literally in. The Middle Ages, waking up wasn't the end of sleep. It was the beginning of a ritual. You don't just roll out of bed and move on. You reset the stage carefully, because tonight, sleep will return and it expects the same hospitality. So you start with the blanket. It's heavy, maybe woolen, maybe patched with old linen. You shake it out at the window, sending yesterday's dreams into the breeze. Dust particles float in the light, like tiny ghosts of stories half remembered. Then the bolster pillow fat, long, slightly lumpy, gets a good thump. This isn't just fluffing. It's a gentle punishment for being too flat, or too hot, or too full of secrets. Now, the straw mattress. You kneel and tug at it, fingers slipping under the ticking. If it's flattened too much in the night, you flip it. If it's really bad, you pull out some old straw and stuff in fresh, taken from a tightly bound sheaf near the wall. This is a meditative moment, like plumping the soul. The bed frame creaks with relief. Then come the linens. Most likely you own only one set, maybe two if you're wealthy. You straighten the sheets slowly, smoothing out every wrinkle like it's a lie that needs correcting. Maybe you sprinkle a few dried lavender petals under the pillow, or tuck in a sachet of rosemary's simple scents that keep bugs away and invite calmer dreams. If it's a noble household, a servant does this part. They might air the bedding, brush the sheets, or even warm a new set of linen on the hearth for later. Some households had bed testers, ornate rods used to press down on a mattress and judge its springiness. Not very scientific, but wonderfully dramatic. You tuck everything in tightly, fold the corners with reverence, and step back. Done right, this becomes a kind of ritualistic closure. You've not only ended your night, you've signaled to your surroundings, and maybe to yourself, I lived another night. I dreamed another story, and now I'm ready for the day. It wasn't just about cleanliness or comfort. For some, especially in monasteries, this process had spiritual significance. Order in the bed reflected order in the soul. A rumpled sheet, a chaotic mind, a poorly tucked blanket. Maybe you were distracted during prayers. Historians still debate how widespread these routines were, but even in the simplest homes, we find echoes of care quilts laid with attention, straw replaced seasonally, pillows lovingly darned. Back in your room, the light now spills freely. The bed looks serene, restored, ready for whatever story it must host next. You run a hand along the cover, feeling the warmth of your own recent sleep. And for a moment, the whole room seems to hold its breath. Not because of something big, but because of something finished well. Asterisk. So here you are, dear sleeper, the last straw shaken, the last dream folded, the bed made, not just in linen, but in memory. You've walked through a night in the Middle Ages not as a scholar, not as a tourist, but as someone who belonged there, someone who tucked themselves into a too-short bed and waited for the stars to hum their lullabies. You've met the monks, fluffed the bolster, worried about dreams, and maybe laughed a little at how much effort it took just to sleep. But now, as your own night wraps gently around you, none of that matters. Let your body grow heavy, let your thoughts dissolve like parchment ink in the rain, and let the quiet hold you, like it did those long-ago souls who whispered prayers before closing their eyes under low wooden beams. The past isn't gone, it just waits quietly, patiently beneath your pillow. So close your eyes, you've earned your sleep.